Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marilyn and my channel is Making with Marilyn. Now I do all things crafty, but on today's video it is time to make my annual birthday tumbler for my daughter. She lives several states away, so I need to make this and a few more things and then get them out in the mail to her on Tuesday. Now to do this project, I'm going to use the Go2Craft tumbler press. This is an auto press. It auto rotates and it auto shuts and closes. I also have a Go2Craft tumbler. I'm going to use some heat resistant gloves. I'm going to use a rotary cutter as well as my cutting mat. I have rubbing alcohol and a paper towel, and then I'm going to use my go-to paper, and that is HTV Romp paper. So if you're interested in this type of content, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Now, before I change the camera angle though, if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing that. If you do, tap that bell and then select the all notification. That way YouTube lets you know anytime I upload new content. I forgot to mention in my intro that I'll also be using a design that I found on Creative Fabrica. I'm going to show that to you in a minute. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and take this tumbler out, measure it, and clean it. Now I often get questions on what size do you print your designs for tumblers? And it really depends on the brand. So you really need to measure your tumblers each time. I got a new tool to do that. I'm going to show you how you use it here in just a minute. Now with the tumblers, in addition to the box, you get the lid, you get the little rubber thing that goes on the bottom after you've sublimated it, and then you get a straw and a cleaner set. Now the reason I went with this one, first of all, it was very expensive and it came in a 2-pack. But a lot of them that I looked at on Amazon came with just 1/10 of an inch, and this actually gets down to the 1/16 of an inch. For me, that's really important. I want it to be as precise as possible. If you wanted to, you could even measure in centimeters, but I'm going to go ahead and stick with inches. When it comes, it'll look more like this. I think I had to actually pull this little piece out. So you put it under and then back up through the little slit. This is going to tell us the diameter of our tumbler. So I'm going to place my tumbler in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull this tight. And I can see mine is 9 5/16 of an inch. Alexa, divide 5 by 16.
5 divided by 16 is 0.3125.
So mine is 9.3125. I'm going to go ahead and go with 9.4. The reason I do that is I want a little bit of overlap. And then I also like to cut off a tiny bit of the ink so that you know you have no white that's going to show up on your tumbler. We'll talk about that more as I wrap the tumbler. So I'm going to print my image at 9.4 wide. Now I'm not going to use this to measure the height because it starts somewhere in here. Well, it starts right there, so that'd be 0, and you're at 3 here. So this isn't going to work to measure the height. I'll get an old-fashioned ruler out. Now, if your ruler is like mine, it doesn't actually start at 0 all the way down here. Notice there's a little bit of a gap before you start at the 0 mark. So I want to take that into consideration when I'm deciding how tall to print my image. All right, that looks like 8 1/16. Alexa, what's 1 divided by 16?
1 divided by 16 is 0.0625.
Now, if I wanted to be precise, I could print it at that, but I'm going to go ahead and do mine at 8.15. So 9.4 wide by 8.15 tall. Now, I might as well go ahead and clean it now. I use 90% rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. If you have a lint-free cloth, that would be even better, but this is what I use. You don't want to spray this when your image is around because the rubbing alcohol will ruin your design. This is going to dry really quickly. By the time my design is printed, we'll be ready to cut it down and wrap it. I'm going to print my design from Inkscape. Inkscape is a free design software, but the first thing that I want to do is make sure this is the right paper size. Mine defaults to a different size, so I know it's not. To change the paper size, I go right up here to File, Document Properties, and then I need to select the paper size that I'm actually using. So I'll click on this A4 and I'm going to use US letter. Once you change the size, the preview here adjusts and I'm ready to close this window. You do that with this red button right here. Now to make this a little bit larger, you hit Shift, hold it down, and then click on the plus sign, and it expands it so you can see it better. To open my design, I can either go File, Open, and find it, or I know where it is on my desktop. Just going to drag this down. It's right here, and I'll pull it over onto the template. I use these default settings, so I'm going to say OK. All right, so here's my design. I've clicked on it. I'm going to change millimeters to inches. And then I wanted mine to be 9.4 by 8.15. With it unlocked, I'll just back over those and I'll put 9.4 and 8.15. It just barely changes the proportions, nothing noticeable, and it still looks great. Now, because this doesn't have any words on it or anything that needs to be a certain way, you don't actually have to mirror this, but I make it a rule. I just always mirror my images. I'm going to go up to Object and down to Flip Horizontal. Now, if I printed this like this, everything you see off the side of the paper would not print. So the last thing that I need to do is go up to Object and rotate 90 degrees. It doesn't matter if it's clockwise or counterclockwise, as long as it all fits on your paper. At this time, I'm ready to go ahead and print this. So I'll go to File, Print, or you can use the shortcut keys. I'm going to use an Epson EcoTank 15,000 that I converted to sublimation. I check Page Setup. I change this to one-sided. I always make sure that color is selected, and then in the Advanced tab, I change it to high. My paper's already in my printer, so I'll just click right here on Print. Here's the printout, and it turned out great. Now this will brighten up when you put it on the tumbler, so if you're new to sublimation, just understand that with sublimation ink, it prints a little bit dull, but again, it really pops once you add that heat. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cut this down. I like to use a rotary cutter, but you can use whatever method works for you. Now remember, I cut this a little bit larger than I needed it because I wanted to be able to cut off a tiny bit of the ink. The reason I do that is it assures me that I'm not going to have a white strip or a white stripe down the side of my tumbler. You can see there's a tiny bit of ink on there. We'll go ahead and do the other side. Then I can wrap it around the tumbler and make sure I didn't print it too small or cut off too much. Now, if you're overlapping your paper and you didn't cut off a little bit of ink on one of the sides, like I don't see any ink on this. I meant to cut some off. And I can tell I have a little white stripe there. I can either cut it down smaller or I can make sure that that goes on top of this side. Let me show you what I'm talking about. When I have my tumbler, I want this side that has no white on it down first, and then I can put this side on top. There's a tiny little bit of an overlap. I think that's going to be fine. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom of the top. hard to tell, but I do have a little bit of the ink on this little slip of paper or sliver of paper. And once again, I'm cutting off just a tiny bit on the top. All right, this is going to be a tight fit. I might have to get out my Pinch Perfect tool. Let me show it to you just in case you're interested. This helps you wrap your paper really snugly around the tumbler. I don't usually use it, but in this case I might need to. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to put this upside down, put my image upside down. I like it to be flat on the table or whatever I'm working on. And then I can tell it's a little too long. I don't want nearly that much paper wrapping around the bottom of my tumbler. I don't want to cut off this, so I'm going to cut a little bit from the bottom. So next time I could cut this a little bit shorter. So a little wider, a little shorter, and that'd be great. All right, tumbler's upside down. My image is upside down. I need to know which side has the white on it, and it's this side here. So that'll go on top. Okay, so pull this paper over it, and that is so close that I'm going to use this Pinch Perfect tool. It's like having a third hand. Okay, let's see. That's the side that needs to be on top. So I just need to pull this up, make sure it is on top. And it is. And the two pieces meet up at the top. Now, until now, I'd forgotten to tell you need heat-resistant tape. So I'm going to grab that real quick. I'm going to take this with me because I like how this is fitting. Okay, so here's my heat-resistant tape. I have so many rolls of heat-resistant tape, but when I run out of this brand, I buy more of it. I just prefer it over the other brands. I also like that it's wide, so this is 20 millimeters wide. Okay, we're going to move up a little bit, squeeze this tight again. I'll put another piece right here, and then I think I'll be good to move on without the Pinch Perfect. I like to start on the side that the paper is on top. That way I can really pull over the side that's on bottom. Now I have a lot of videos where I go through my process of taping. And it works for me. I do use a lot of tape, but this method works for me. So if you'd like to see a more detailed video on that, check out some of my other videos. I'll make sure I link one in the video description, and I'll probably actually have a link to it at the end of the video. Okay, I like my paper to be just above the top of the tumbler. To me, that's a little too much. I don't want it quite that far. So I just kind of work on my paper until I get it where I want it. Now on this design, it is very forgiving because there is a lot of white in this design. So if I accidentally have a little white line at the top, it's not going to be too bad. I have other tumblers that if that happened, you would really notice. So here's an example of that. I needed this paper to go all the way to the top and just slightly over the top. Otherwise, you'd end up with a white streak up there. Okay, before I do the top, I'm going to go ahead and finish taping off the main seam of this. Now the paper that's on top is away from me since I flipped it. So I'm going to start by putting tape down on that side and really work it to pull on it. Then I just pull my tape around the bottom side and adhere it down. Now I have some wrinkles and ripples in there, so I'm going to go ahead and burnish that down. This is just a scraper tool. You can use anything you want to do this. And then I like to push against the seam. Now to finish this tumbler, I want a long piece of tape. I'm going to tape it on the piece of paper that's on top and pull that way. You don't want to pull against it and try to open that seam up. My first piece of tape is going to be about even with the top of the tumbler. If it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. But this first piece of tape is going to basically hold my paper stable. I don't want to stretch the paper down on the tumbler. I don't want to get those crinkly effects at the top. Then I'm going to take a second piece, have it about halfway up off the tumbler, and then I'm going to pull it super tight because I want to stretch this tape to cause a little rebound effect. And by that I mean it's trying to pull in. That way I make sure my paper's down tight. Now I go through a lot of extra steps with my tape that some people don't, and they have beautiful tumblers too, but this has been the method that's worked the best for me. So if you're not doing this and your tumblers are great, keep doing what you're doing. But if you're having issues at the top, the bottom, or on the seam, you might give this a try. I'm going to speed through this last part. I'm basically going to do the same thing that I did at the top, but I'm going to do it at the bottom instead. Now when I'm pushing my tape down, I go straight around, or I go around and I push straight over. I don't push like that because I don't want to twist my paper. Now I'm going to look for puckers, and I see one. It's right here. Let me see if you can see that. A little pucker in the paper there. It's not fully adhered against the tumbler. If I were to press this, and if the press didn't push that in for me, I'd have one of those white crinkly things there. So I'm going to look for those puckers. And I see a few of them. Again, this design is going to be very forgiving because there's so much white in it. This is just the process that I use each and every time I do a tumbler. Okay, then I can just put this on my cutting mat and really push down hard to make it adhere even better. You might notice that I have a tumbler in here. This is just my heater tumbler or my burner tumbler. It's one that I use over and over and over when I'm preheating my tumbler presses. They say that you should have one in there, and so I just keep using this one over and over. You turn this press on the back. There's a little rocker switch right here, so I'm just going to press that up. And then it has 4 modes. Mode 1 is for stainless steel tumblers. I have it set to 365. It would heat it for 50 seconds, rotate, and 50 more seconds. I have a glass can preset. I have a custom preset that I can make whatever temperature, time, and pressure I want. And then you have a ceramic mug preset. I'm going to go back to my stainless steel preset and let this heat up. Now that my press is heated up, I'm going to go ahead and remove that tumbler that I used to preheat it. When I'm using a manual tumbler press, one that lays flat on the table, I always use butcher paper as kind of a paper cradle. The paper that I use doesn't bleed through the back, and it's a little tricky to use that paper cradle in here. You could wrap the whole thing with butcher paper, but I'm just going to go ahead and use it without. I want to have my seam either on the left side or the right side. That's just the way I like to do it. And then there's a start button up on top. I'm going to press that. It's going to close up. Now that it's closed, it's going to heat for 50 seconds. Now there is a little bit of a gap there. It is going to rotate after 50 seconds and heat again. Even though there's a gap there, you're still going to have some heat that bleeds into that. Then it'll rotate, it'll get fully heated, and they've always turned out fine. Even when you have a little gap, as long as you rotate them, mine have always turned out fine. This is getting ready to open and rotate. When it rotates, if the seam ends up in front, I'll probably hit this stop button and I'll move it just a little bit. All right, you can see it rotating. I think the seam's going to be fine. Yeah, that looks good. So in 50 more seconds, I'm going to go ahead and take the tumbler out. I have just this heating pad here. I'll set it down on the table and let it cool off for a few minutes. Now I didn't show you, but inside there is a little pedestal that your tumbler is sitting up on. When I got my first tumbler press that was like this, that was upright and it rotated by itself, I was concerned that the bottom of the tumbler wouldn't have enough heat. I thought it was on the bottom and was barely getting any heat, but there is a base in there that holds it up. Now this is still pretty hot, but I need to be getting out the door. So I'm going to go ahead and put my heat glove on. These are heat resistant, not heat proof. And this actually isn't too hot anymore. I'm going to put a little slit in the tape. That just helps me unwrap it. I'll do the same thing at the bottom. Now, these have a little silver thing on them. If that pulls up, not a big deal because you're going to cover it with this. I'm always so excited to see how these turn out. Okay. Come on, tape. Work with me. All right. Oh, that's cute. Now let's see. Do I have any white on this tumbler? That is really cute. My seam looks good. I don't see any white back there. My top looks good. The bottom looks really good. All right, let me show you. Look how cute that is. Now at the bottom, I don't like to wrap it under because that's where you start getting the crinkly things. And so when this is sitting on the table, you don't even notice that it's not wrapped under the bottom. Let me face it toward you. There we go. This is super cute. I love it. There's the top seam, the bottom seam, and then hopefully you can see the back seam really well. I think it turned out adorable. I can't wait until she gets this and I hear from her. I love it. So thank you so much for joining me today. And until my next video, bye-bye.